Good afternoon, and welcome to the Full Scottish on this Sunday, the 19th of January. I apologise for the late start. I don't know whether Russians have been cutting underwater cables, but all sorts of technical gremlins have been rampaging through the system this morning. But here we are. Regular viewers will know that the Full Scottish is broadcasting Scotland's review of the stories making the headlines over the past 7 days, and that we kick ahead to the stories which will be making headlines in the coming week. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, and I'm delighted to be joined by two guests today to discuss the stories behind the headlines. The first is Rona Mackay, MSP, who, after a long and distinguished career in journalism with national papers, entered Parliament in 2016, where she's been the Member of the Scottish Parliament now for Strathkelvin and Bearsden. I'm also joined by Francis Coppola, a frequent contributor to the programme, author and blogger, author of the Case for People's Quantitative Easing, and author of soon-to-appear book on banking, which can't come soon enough for most of us, I suspect. So thank you both for giving up part of your Sunday to join us. Welcome. We start the programme, as we always do, with the latest news from Ukraine. On this day 1061 since the Russian invasion of the country. A Russian missile strike on the Ukrainian capital killed 3 people on Saturday, Ukrainian leaders said, calling it a heinous attack, while Moscow described it as retaliation. Ukrainian officials said another 3 people were killed in Russian strikes elsewhere in the country, and Moscow claimed fresh advances on the ground. Kyiv officials said the victims were 2 men aged 43 and 25 and a 41-year-old woman, while Agence France-Presse reported a multi-story building with windows blown out, debris strewn across the street, flooding, and the charred facade of a damaged McDonald's outlet. The Office of Ukraine's General Prosecutor said in a statement that the casualties included a security guard at a food establishment and people who were in a minibus on the street. Russia launched 39 Shahed drones, other simulator drones, and 4 ballistic missiles in the early hours of Saturday, according to Ukraine's Air Force. Ukrainian Air Defense Forces shot down 2 missiles and 24 drones. A further 14 drone simulators were lost in location, the statement said. Russian forces took control of 2 more settlements in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region, Moscow said on Saturday. The latest in a series of gains, it is reported in its steady advance westward. Russia's defense ministry said its forces were now in control of Petropavlivka, a village between the towns of Pokrovsk and Kurakova, focal points in fighting in recent months in the area. It also noted the capture of Vremivka, one of a cluster of small towns farther south in the Donetsk region. The Russian Foreign Ministry said Ukraine and UK had no room for cooperation in the Sea of Azov, commenting on a new 100-year partnership agreement between Kyiv and London, the 2 countries' leaders announced on Thursday. Any claims to this water area are a gross interference in the internal affairs of our country and will be firmly resisted, spokesperson Maria Zakharova said on the ministry's website. The Azov Sea is bordered by southwest Russia, parts of southern Ukraine that Russia has seized in the war, and the Crimean Peninsula that Moscow illegally annexed from Ukraine in 2014. Industrial sites in Russia's Kaluga and Tula regions were set ablaze by Ukrainian drone attacks, local officials said on Saturday. Russia's defense ministry said 46 Ukrainian drones had been destroyed across the country overnight. Hundreds of Swedish troops arrived in Latvia on Saturday to join a Canadian-led multinational brigade along NATO's eastern flank, a mission Sweden is calling its most significant operation so far as a member of the Western Defence Alliance. Latvia borders Russia to its east and Russian ally Belarus to its southeast. Tensions are high across Central Europe due to Russia's war against Ukraine. Sweden's armed forces said the mission of 550 troops marks Sweden's largest commitment yet since joining NATO last year. Well, I suspect that the most important factor in what's happening in Ukraine will start on Monday with the inauguration of Donald Trump, which is something we'll cover later. But the European position, and specifically the UK position in signing this 100-year security pact with Ukraine, is the UK and the Europe up to the job, Rona?
Well, I sincerely hope so. I think we all just need some hope in that area, because this is just, people are just sick of wars, and this particular war, it just seems to be interminable. So it remains to be seen. I think we have to cling on to hope, and look for the positives in the situation. Um, and yeah, I think it's difficult to say for certain just how that's going to play out.
Indeed, Francis, there have been, I made a light-hearted remark about cutting cables, but there have been many more instances of what have been called hybrid warfare, and Donald Tusk, the Polish president, was talking about a plot by Russia to put bombs on cargo airplanes. Is this something which is going to be the flavor of 2025? Do you think Russian interference and aggression in other parts of Europe?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, it has been Russian playbook for quite some time. It's just, in a way, we don't talk about it enough. And this kind of aggression that Russia shows in other parts of Europe, and has done for a long time, has done for 10 years. I mean, have we forgotten MH17 already, which was shot down by Russia? It was a Dutch plane. I mean, and it's like we forget that happened. It was 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. No, Russia has been showing aggression towards its European neighbours, and indeed towards its Asian neighbours as well, for really ever since Putin came to power, one way or another. I mean, in 2008, Putin invaded Georgia. We forget that too.
Yes, indeed. One of the commentators said we call it hybrid warfare because then we don't need to do anything about it. But perhaps at some point this year we will have to do something about it. Turning now to the other major war zone, Gaza in the Middle. At least 46,899 Palestinians have been killed and 110,725 wounded in Gaza since 7th of October 2023. Israel was still attacking Gaza this morning as Hamas named the first 3 hostages to be released today. Will the ceasefire, which came into force at 9:15 this morning, be respected? And what will it mean for people in Gaza, humanitarian aid, reconstruction? And in the long term, is it actually a step towards peace? Most of the world talks about peace meaning a 2-state solution for the territory, whereas both Hamas and Netanyahu are opposed to a 2-state solution. I know you've tweeted regularly, and indeed this morning, on it, Francis. What are your thoughts on the current stage of the ceasefire?
Yeah, my view, I think you know if you see my tweets, is that I will be surprised if this ceasefire holds. I don't think the wording from Netanyahu is that one way or another, the agreement he's made to keep his coalition together. I mean, Ben-Gvir resigned, but Smotrich didn't, and the promises he appears to have made to Smotrich to keep him in the coalition is that phase 2 of this ceasefire will never happen. It's meant the negotiations meant to start in 16 days. I think they'll collapse quite quickly. And there will be no phase 2, and it is plain to me that Netanyahu intends to resume the war. And he's claiming that he has the backing of both Joe Biden and, more importantly, the incoming President Trump to recommence the war with more force. He's also promised Smotrich more violence on the West Bank too.
Yes, you made that point in your tweet this morning that there may be a ceasefire in Gaza, but there's not a ceasefire in the West Bank. What can you say about the situation in the West Bank, Francis?
It's getting worse. I mean, Israel stormed a number of towns and villages yesterday. We should remember that everything Israel does in the West Bank is illegal. Its forces should not be there. They've been told in no uncertain terms to leave. Israel is breaking international law by continuing to operate in the West Bank. And I don't think that we should be sweeping this under the carpet. In a way, Gaza and then Lebanon as well, and even Syria, have been a huge distraction from what's going on in the West Bank, which has been going on for a couple of years now, which is a very right-wing government in Israel, increasingly clamping down on, repressing and brutalising West Bank Palestinians in complete violation of international law. That's the position. I think we should be shouting about it a lot more.
Thank you. Quite a glum look at what's happening. I mean, I suppose, Rona, we should be glad for a ceasefire at least, and the thought that some humanitarian aid will, one presumes, reach the people who need it in Gaza. But what is your prognosis for the next few weeks and months of the situation in Gaza?
Well, I mean, I agree 100% with what Francis has said, and it is a really depressing fact that I think most of us really don't hold out a lot of hope. As you said, Douglas, even after the ceasefire was announced, and even today, they're still killing families and civilians, and it's just a horrible situation, and the facts speak for themselves. 17,000 children have been orphaned, and that's probably a huge underestimate of the figure of what's really happened. The trauma that these children have experienced is beyond all comprehension. We have a generation that really is a lost generation now. It's just horrible, and I don't think, if they were serious, if Israel were serious about this, they would have been talking about planning for a two-state solution. Their plans would have been made. Nothing's been done. I think they're paying lip service to it, and I think it's very, very cruel. And the release of the hostages, well, I think they said 3 today, and the families are kept waiting, not knowing. And all that waiting and uncertainty is part of the power game that they play and the mind games that they play with people. And it's just inhumane, quite frankly. And yes, I think our hearts were lifted when we heard about a ceasefire. And then as time went on, you start to think, is this genuine? And I'm afraid, as I say, I agree with Francis. I don't think this is going to be the solution at all.
And taking a parochial view on it, Rona, the United States seem to be unable to influence Netanyahu, so it's unlikely that the UK government could. But it hasn't exactly covered itself in glory, has it, in the attitude it's taken?
No, I don't think so. I don't think all along. I don't think it's covered itself in glory, because they're trying to, to pander to two different sets of people. Obviously, Israel is a huge influence in America and in American politics, and I don't think they've been brave enough to say this has to stop. And we all sit by, and we can't do anything but watch this unfold every night on our TV screens and think, it's heartbreaking. And I know from speaking to friends and family now, people are saying they can't bear to watch the television to see more children and civilians being killed. It's just horrible, and words that are not enough to explain what's been going on. And after the ceasefire was announced, I heard one presenter say, laughably, oh, now, Palestinians will be able to go back home. They don't have homes to go back to. Their homes are being utterly obliterated. And, none of that seems to be. This is what makes me think this is not a serious, a serious initiative at all.
Indeed. So, fairly glum view on both of our top two stories. Now, looking forward to what's happening in the week ahead, and I suppose the bigliest one will be the inauguration of President Trump, who will be sworn in as the 47th president and first ever convicted felon at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 p.m. GMT tomorrow. Among his VIP guests will be the January 6, 2020 rioters, Nigel Farage, and the tech brothers Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos. Now, if I ask you, Rona, what does it mean for the world? I don't know where to start. Do we start with Greenland, Panama, Canada, tariffs?
Yeah.
The attack on the justice system, his hearings for his would-be cabinet, where the Russians themselves say that the candidate for director of intelligence is a Russian asset, and the Secretary of Defense to be is a television presenter. So I don't know where to start. I'll leave it to you. What does the future hold? Do you think?
I mean, this is it. I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would almost be funny, but it certainly isn't. And I'm very, very fearful for the future with this man in charge. I certainly won't be watching the inauguration tomorrow. I think everything we know, and you've articulated some of it. In any other world, in any other scenario, this man would be seen as unstable. Well, he is unstable, but somehow he's ended up leading the most powerful nation in the world. And people can say, well, it's democracy, and the people chose him. And I don't think most right-thinking people can understand why that happened. It's probably got much more deeper roots than I can imagine. That someone would think that this man was fit to be the president of the United States. So yeah, I mean, he's just, everything he says is becoming almost more unbelievable. And quite honestly, shame on Nigel Farage for even going to that and supporting him, because they must see the risk that he poses, not just to America, but to world and to the world, and to when it comes to business interests. He's already talking about deporting the vast majority of immigrants who are picking fruit, who are contributing to the American economy. And I just think it's a really scary state to be in. And I think most people find it quite unbelievable, to be honest, that he's actually going to be there tomorrow. We never thought this would happen. Never thought it would happen the first time, far less the second time.
Thank you. I think that's the first time I've ever heard the words shame and Nigel Farage in the same sentence. So that's thanks for that contribution. Francis, I'll give you free rein as well to pick on what you like on Trump. But as an economist, I'm quite interested in your view on what tariffs are going to do to the United States and the rest of the world.
Yeah. It very much depends what he does. And there's one thing I would say about Trump. It sort of defines Trump. Actually, it's unpredictability. It's why it's actually so very hard to call how he's going to handle Ukraine, what he's going to do about the Middle East. It's really hard to predict. Similarly, what he's going to do about China, what he's going to do about his neighbours that he is busy threatening. Telling Canada it should become the 51st state, and threatening and saying he wants to buy Greenland, and whatever he's planning to do to Mexico, which won't be pretty either, and also the threats against Panama. He is menacing his neighbours in much the same way that Putin does. Whether it would follow through into actual military action, I'm not sure. But he does treat tariffs as a weapon. He did in his previous administration use tariffs as a way of disciplining China, and against the EU as well. China's response to that at the time was interesting because although it responded to some extent, it didn't put in tariffs to the same degree, and it basically just sat there and waited for the dollar to go up, which it did, and American consumers to take the hit, which they did. The tariffs were more damaging to America than they were to China. But one effect the tariffs do have is that they reshape supply chains. So when a country is facing tariffs, direct ad valorem tariffs from the USA, it tends to redirect its exports to somewhere else, and the exports still make their way back to the US just by a different route. We saw that under the previous administration. I think we will see that again. So the big threat to me is not what it does with China or what it does with the EU, whatever it's, because that will reshape global trade. There are two things. One is the effect it will have on the dollar, because the dollar is already soaring, and if he goes ahead with his plans of tariffs, it will rise even more. How much it rises will depend to a considerable extent upon whether the extent of his tariffs and the extent to which they can be substituted for in other places. But we are going to go into an era of a very strong dollar, and that is going to be very painful for the world. We know that a persistently strong dollar is particularly hard on developing countries who rely on dollar finance because it becomes very hard for them to obtain it. And we know that if it's sustained, it shrinks global GDP. And I think that is the risk that I would be looking at.
Okay, thank you. Rona, again, turning to a domestic issue there with tariffs. John Swinney spoke about a week ago saying that he would try to use Trump's Scottish roots to have an influence on tariffs on Scotch whisky. Have tariffs been a major source of discussion a major discussion point in the Scottish government?
Well, I mean, yes, tariffs would undoubtedly affect our economy. I mean, if you talk about the whisky industry and our food industry and our food exports and everything, huge impact it's going to have on that. And it's absolutely the last thing that Scotland needs. And so it has been taken very seriously, and I think John Swinney would hope to get some sort of dialogue to make the impression, if we can ever do that, on Donald Trump, to say, this is absolute madness, and if you proclaim to love Scotland and have Scottish roots, why would you do this? Yes, we are very fearful of this, and hope that it doesn't happen.
I'd like to ask you both about Trump and Ukraine and Trump and NATO. Of course, he was going to solve the problem of the Ukraine war in a day, and now they're talking about several months. He's talking about meeting with Putin. He also said yesterday that he wants to visit China in his first 100 days. Is there a realistic hope that he can solve the problem? I know he can stop the problem. He can absolutely abandon Ukraine, but can he solve the problem which will be fair and just for Ukraine, do you think? Or does he have an interest in so doing? I'll say with you, Rona, first.
Well, I mean, I think Donald Trump only has an interest in anything if it's going to benefit him and his ego and his power status in America. So the words fair and just, I don't think, can be used in the same sentence as Donald Trump. So I'm afraid I don't hold out any hope that he's going to be able to do this, despite bragging and claims that he will. This is all about him, and it always will be. I don't think it's ever going to be for the benefit of any other country, or frankly, humanity or anyone else. So we wait and see.
That's a fair point, Francis. But Rona's also mentioning his ego, and I can imagine his ego would be severely bruised if he felt that Russia had managed to defeat the West in Ukraine. Surely that might push him towards a more positive view in support for the country.
Not necessarily. I mean, the thing about Trump is the deal maker. I mean, you read his book, The Art of the Deal. So what he will want to do is to be perceived as having done a deal that, and this applies also to the Middle East, by the way. He wants to be seen as the person who does the deal that ends the war, that brings peace. Now, it depends what you mean by peace. When you have a peace, not everybody wins. And it's entirely possible that he might try to broker a peace with Putin that dismembers Ukraine, hands over part of it to Russia. That's possible. And I personally wouldn't rule it out at all. And the other dimension to this, which I think is worth remembering, is that from Trump's point of view, if you look historically at America's relationship with Europe, I'm talking quite like 100 years ago history, or even 1940s, you have a front line, a war in Europe, actually quite a long-standing one, which then continued in another form, in the form of the Cold War. It's often presented as being Russia facing off against some Western power or powers. But I think the way Trump appears to view it, and increasingly people around him appear to view it, is that America is actually facing off against China. Russia is an irrelevance, and Russia is essentially arguing with Europe about its border with Europe, and it's up to Europe and Russia to sort it out. And he could say, "I've got more important things to worry about than this. Back off, Europe, you sort it out." And I think Europe needs to be prepared for that as a possible strategy by the Trump administration. It would involve pulling America out of NATO, but I think that's a possibility anyway.
Yes, I mean, they've been quite. Sorry, go ahead, Jonah.
No, just I mean, I agree again with what Francis said, and I think to remember that Trump's MO is always about it's gesture politics. He is a deal maker. That's his that's how he's lived his life, and he will, if he tries to broker a deal and it doesn't come to anything or doesn't work, he will blame someone else and say, well, I did this, so and it's just all about it'll always come back to him and his bragging rights. So I think it's possible that he will just maybe stand back and say, well, get on with it. I've tried and I've done my bit, but it's not my fault. It's your fault. And I think that's what he'll do.
Yeah, there are plenty of European leaders who've warned about that and said that Europe does have to be stronger in its own defence. But it's all very well talking about it. Doing something about it is quite different. And Germany talking about cutting its defence budget after talking about increasing it. Although, of course, there will probably be a new government in Germany come February. Is Europe up to the task, Francis?
I don't think it's united enough, actually. And actually, historically, that's always been the problem, that Europe is never united enough. You have to look at what, I mean, you're talking about Germany. Yes, Germany has got quite serious problems, and I'm not looking forward to the prospect of this new administration either. We'll have to see what that's like. But you need to look at, for example, what Viktor Orban is saying. That is Europe. It wasn't part of Europe when I was a child, but it is now. And it's that front line, that fault line. You need to be looking at what people like Viktor Orban are saying, the stance of the president of Slovakia, the fears expressed by the Baltic states, which I think are realistic, and Moldova as well, and also the attitude of Poland. That it's these states ultimately that will take the brunt of this because they're the frontline states. of Europe. And I think that's the change we may need to be thinking about. And I'm not sure Europe is making that change yet, between thinking about this is the front line of NATO, with the exception of Moldova, which isn't in NATO, but hey, we can bring Moldova into NATO, versus this actually is the front line of Europe, between Europe and the Russian Empire, which never really died.
Sadly, no. Staying with President Trump and TikTok, he expressed a great fondness for it because he claimed it helped him win the election, and he has a very large number of followers on it. But the Supreme Court said it was going to go ahead and ban it. Now, he can't overturn the Supreme Court yet, although he could presumably tell Apple and the other app stores that they would not suffer any ill effects from continuing to promote TikTok on their in their app stores. Do you think he will do it, and do you think it makes a difference in the United States? I mean, I can see that it makes a difference because spending a lot of my time in Romania, we had a candidate in the presidential election in the first round whose campaign was solely on TikTok and topped the ballot, and then it was overturned by the Supreme Court because of the Russian influence in it. I don't know, is it so important for the United States, and what do you think is going to happen there, Rona?
I don't think Donald Trump will ban TikTok, and I mean for a very basic reason is that he they have pandered to him. He has said that they've been good to him, and any platform he can get, he will take. And I just don't believe he would he would want to. I think he will try and overturn the decision. I just don't believe he would willingly go ahead and ban it, simply because if it was in any way left leaning, he would, but simply because they give him a platform, and so I don't think he will.
Francis, what do you think? And do you think it's important whether it's banned or not?
Yeah, I do think it's important. It's interesting that the Supreme Court has honed in on TikTok, because arguably the same criticisms could be made of X, but they haven't honed in on that.
Yes.
So if you're talking about, using particular special interest groups using social media, the owners of special interest groups using their social media platforms to present a particular point of view, there's a fairly glaring double standard here, which does not really look good on the US justice system. So I think this is actually a fairly bizarre decision by the US Supreme Court, really, unless they're going to follow that up by enforcing similar bans on some actual US companies, which seems unlikely. So I'm not quite sure where this is going to go, because on one hand you've got a president who has an interesting relationship with the rule of law, shall we say, and seems to be and saying, when it doesn't suit me, I'm just going to ignore it. And a justice system which, to me, increasingly looks quite compromised anyway. And I'm not sure where that's taking us. I think that's very worrying for the United States, potentially also for the world.
Indeed. Excuse me. Turning to the UK now. As the UK economy continues to struggle, the UK government is looking at a £3 billion public service cut with a focus on cutting disability benefits. Although this has been set back after a judge ruled that the UK government incapacity benefit cuts consultation was misleading and unlawful. Now, Sir Keir Starmer told The Sun he has, quote, the balls to make the cuts, which presumably was a response to Penny Mordaunt in 2023 saying that they had no balls. But first of all, do you need balls to hit disability benefits and the poorest in society? Are the balls not more necessary to tackle the wealthy and highly profitable companies? Rona?
Well, I mean, first of all, I hate that kind of macho rhetoric, and these phrases that are used. I just think it's pretty disgusting, quite honestly. And the second thing is, I'm astounded at the way this Labour government have, started their time in office and what they're doing. And, some of the measures are quite unbelievable. I mean, I speak as a Labour Party member decades ago, and I can't recognise this party at all. I mean, whatever happened to tax the rich? He's talking about being strong enough to cut benefits to the most vulnerable in society. And it's one of these things you think, am I understanding this correctly? This sounds incredible. And we have a party which is clearly divided. Scottish Labour MSPs do not agree with him in many aspects, and they just don't seem to be able to agree on much at all. They see the damage that it's doing them when they were on the crest of a wave 6 months ago, winning the so many seats in the election, and in that 6 months, it's just completely turned around. And I think I know from canvassing and going around my constituency that people are astonished and say this is not what I voted for. So we have, first of all, cutting the winter fuel allowance, which our party, the SNP, aim to restore, not lifting the two-child benefit cap, which we aim to restore, and the national insurance hike, which is actually a tax on jobs, and it's hitting third sector voluntary organisations, and the total betrayal of the WASPy women who were cheated out of their state pension for so many years. Pledging before the election to stand with them and compensate them, happy to have their pictures taken with them at any opportunity, and now saying, sorry, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, it defies belief, quite honestly, and I think, if they're hemorrhaging votes, certainly they are in Scotland, then it's all on them. So quite unbelievable that a Labour Prime Minister would talk about taxing the cutting benefits to people who really need it. It's just, words fail me, quite honestly.
But then Mr. Murray tells us that the loss of votes is due to Labour's honesty, and Mr. Sarwar reiterated this week that there's no austerity in Scotland, right?
Well, yeah, he can say that, but that doesn't mean he's actually correct. He did say publicly before the election, there'll be no austerity under Labour, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's what we expected would happen, but not even in quite such a blatant way as they're actually going about it. And they really are in trouble. They are in trouble now, and I think it'd be very difficult for them to come back after all these moves, because people don't forget they're doing things that resonate with the public, that they understand. They don't really understand about the Financial Times Index and the that sounds patronising. The majority of people don't really understand the way that the economy works, but they do understand when they are worse off and they are being penalised because of decisions taken. And I don't think they're going to be able to come back from this.
Thank you. Francis, I have your say on the disability cuts, but I'm interested in you as an economist again. I haven't opened an economics textbook in years, but the other pillar or plank of the strategy Rachel Reeves was announcing this week was she wanted growth, and the two big things were increasing the amount of money that you could use in a tap transaction on a debit card, and to reduce the stringency of mortgage lending. So I don't understand how increasing the burden on households with their mortgage payments is going to boost growth, and I can only see that the debit card thing is going to increase growth for fraudsters using near field detection devices to swipe these cards at airports and crowded places. But perhaps you've got a better explanation of how this might work.
No, I haven't. I mean, really, pretty much my conclusion. I would add to that that the one form of growth that relaxing mortgage lending does do, and has been seen many times before, is that it raises house prices. So what we're actually doing is exactly the same as George Osborne's strategy before the 2015 election, which was to relax mortgage lending rules in order to create a feel-good factor, but the effect was to reduce house prices. We know the Help to Buy scheme had that effect. If they go ahead with, I don't know, relaxing the affordability limits or reducing the capital requirements for banks for 90% mortgages or whatever they're thinking of, it will have the same effect. Because what we're not getting to grips with, I mean, they have this lovely target of 300,000 new homes per year, but they have no idea how they're going to hit it. And no government since the 1950s has got anywhere near that. And they only achieved it in the 1950s because they had a massive social house building program, which this government actually doesn't have. They've got no idea how they're going to reach that. And without that kind of increase in supply, any measures to increase demand on the mortgage side are going to increase house prices.
Yes, Rona said that she didn't believe it could be this bad. What is your view from the south of England? Did you really think that the Labour policy was going to follow this route before the election?
No, but I was concerned before the election that the whole strategy, Labour kind of what it was offering the public, was not really a coherent set of policies, so much as not the Tories. And I didn't really think that was going to be something they could rely on for long after the election. We're not the Tories, so of course it would be different. Well, no. Why would it be different? We need to know what your policies are, and we didn't know what your policies are. And I think in terms of the long term, we still don't. So Rachel Reeves is we're going for growth. Well, Liz Truss was going for growth. Chancellors always go for growth. The question is, sort of what policies they've got to achieve that. And all the policies I'm seeing from Reeves at the moment are actually hampering growth. I mean, I agree with Rona completely about the national insurance hike. That makes no sense at all. It's a tax on jobs. How is that supposed to promote growth? She needs to be nurturing and supporting and helping businesses. And in a sort of fair play to Truss, she was at least trying to do that. Reeves isn't doing that. It does not make any sense to say you can raise taxes like this and also cut it and make cuts to things as well, while having no policies for how you're going to support and nurture businesses so they can deliver growth, and have no policies yourself at the moment, significant at any rate, for increasing government spending to promote growth. I mean, it does not add up at the moment. Maybe, and we're 6 months in, and I would have expected to have seen a more coherent set of policies than this by now.
Yes, I think we all would. Our final topic today is back to Scotland and the First Minister's vision. John Swinney has often said that he wants to eradicate child poverty. During the coming week, he will set out his vision for Scotland's economy to reach its full potential. 3 areas: he wants to capitalise on Scotland's energy potential. He wants to address Scotland's population challenge with an immigration system that recognises Scotland's needs. And he wants Scotland's relationship with the EU re-evaluated. Now, I'm sure that there are many unionists who would agree with those 3 areas as important. However, there's another important point, that each of those 3 areas, Rona, is a reserved power to Westminster. So is this really something that John Swinney and the government can do anything about, or is it simply a rallying cry for independence?
We've been calling for more powers over immigration, particularly for decades, and particularly in my time, almost 9 years being elected. We've been saying that we have distinct and separate needs, and it's not about independence for the sake of it. It's part of the solution to, growing our economy and solving problems that are largely not of our making because we are dictated to by Westminster. So I think it's remarkable in the past 6 months how John Swinney has turned round the fortunes of our party. If you are to believe the polls, it's incredible turnaround, and obviously Labour have been a huge part of that by the mess that they're making, but also the clear vision that John Swinney has set out is I can't see I can't see why people, and I get that what you're saying is that unionists would want that too, but they're not doing anything to help it happen. And what we're doing is saying, this is what we can do, this is what we will do. But don't forget, we are spending millions, and I've forgotten the exact number, mitigating Westminster policies, which should be put to better use, pursuing our vision for Scotland. And I think everything that in this vision makes perfect sense. It would make perfect sense to the people of Scotland, and only if the unionists would stop scaremongering about independence, then people would think, yeah, let's do this. We're on a different trajectory, and we need to be doing this now to help our country prosper.
Thanks. The figure you were looking for, Rona, spent on mitigation is £56 million.
Well, yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, there we are. So that's a lot of money that we could use in the health service or in education or providing jobs, and it's just shocking that we're having to do that. And but I think the people were promised change with the Labour government 6 months ago. They didn't think it was the change that we're now seeing with all the cuts and the austerity. They were promised there would be no austerity. That's been a lie. So I think people will open their eyes now and say we need to go a different way. And certainly the polls are showing that to be the case.
Thank you. Francis, I always feel guilty when I ask you about the minutiae of Scottish economic policy when you're down in the south of England. So instead, I'll ask you the classic exam question: compare and contrast the economic strategy that the Scottish government is trying to set forth compared to what Rachel Reeves is doing.
Well, I've already said what I think about Rachel Reeves' economic policy. John Swinney's vision at least has the benefit of being coherent. I think that Rachel Reeves would do well to listen and say maybe there's some room here, for more devolution to an obviously responsible Scottish government. For example, Scotland is a world leader in wind. In offshore wind, it makes complete sense for Scotland, the Scottish government, to take more responsibility for its own energy policy, things like that. So maybe there's some room there for negotiation with Westminster about more devolution. That's the first thing, without going fully down the independence route. And secondly, that maybe there's some pushback to Rachel Reeves herself, who appears to be floundering around looking for policies, to say, look, here are some things you could look at that would be popular, that would move you forward, and that potentially would generate growth across the country as a whole.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, 16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around 2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you again to very patient guests who suffered through the technical gremlins we had this morning, Rona Mackay, MSP, and Francis Coppola. So I wish you all a pleasant Sunday, and please join us during the week with our evening programme at 7 o'clock, Scotland at 7. But for me, for now, goodbye.